Ray, what kind of game plan is in place? Obviously, following the bombing of the World Trade Center, officials really sat up and took notice and knew that this kind of attack, and perhaps not of this magnitude, but another terrorist attack was possible. So what kind of game plan was put in place?
Well, there's tremendous reliance on intelligence gathering. Certainly the FBI and CIA work more closely now than ever in communicating with each other and gathering information with the NSA. The FBI has set up counterterrorism task forces throughout the country. There's now, I believe, 23 of them. New York City was the first. And indeed, that was the entity that did the investigation of the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. There's a lot more awareness now than there was in 1993, quite frankly, but obviously can prevent a terrible tragedy like this.
All right. Well, Ray Kelly, former New York Police Commissioner. Mr. Kelly, thanks very much for talking with us this morning. We're going to go now to Washington, to Campbell Brown, who is across the street from the White House.
Been informed where the president is, and this is of course deliberate, is whether or not the White House will decide to put him on the so-called Doomsday Plane. This is a special plane designed for the president in the event of a nuclear attack, and it's far more sophisticated than Air Force One. It has the absolute most advanced electronics equipment on board. He's able to communicate with anyone at any time and able to command the armed forces from this plane. They're able to refuel it mid-air, and they could essentially keep the president on this plane for an extended period of time. We don't know if that's an option that has been considered or something that they are looking at trying to do right now, or whether or not his plan is to come back here to the White House. The situation where we are now
Much for that update, and please keep us posted as things develop there.
Katie, joining us on the phone now is the governor of the state of New York, George Pataki. Governor, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Obviously, we're looking at some just devastating pictures of Lower Manhattan, similar pictures at the Pentagon in Washington, and another incident in Pittsburgh. Just first of all, your reaction.
Well, it's just a horrible, horrible day. It's an attack upon America, an attack upon New York, and we have to respond longer term to make sure we protect ourselves. But right now, we have to deal with this crisis and try to help the people who are still trapped, still at risk. And we've mobilized our National Guard and statewide fire and emergency services teams, and we're communicating and working with the city, and everything we can do to try to provide support is being done.
After the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center, I mean, was there a sense that some of the vulnerability had been eliminated through security measures? I mean, obviously no one can predict an airliner or two airliners crashing into these buildings, but was there some sense that security had been shored up?
You know, you do everything you can. You make sure that people don't get into the towers without being inspected. You make sure that people can't park under the towers, but you just can't be prepared for a plane to fly into one of the towers or two planes to fly into the towers. It's a horrible, horrible situation. Our heart goes out to all those whose families are at risk, and we're just going to do everything we can to respond and be supportive and helpful to
Obviously, the loss of life is the primary concern right now in helping those who've been injured. But if you will, at least talk to me a little bit about the other impact of this building. This is, for example, as Tom and Katie and I have pointed out, the world financial center, the hub of finances in the world, if not at least here in the United States. What type of damage has been done to the financial infrastructure of this country?
The economic impact is something we can talk about as the days unfold. Right now, we still have to focus on making sure we save as many people as possible, help those who are injured, help with an orderly removal of the people who are leaving downtown and leaving the city. We're going to focus on that and be concerned about what may or may not be the economic consequences once the immediate crisis has passed.
All right. Do you have plans to get down to this area?
Yes, I'm in the city, and I've been in touch with the mayor, and we're going to be continuing to do everything we can.
Governor, what about other emergency procedures for the city of New York in the next several days in terms of what's going to remain shut down and so on? A lot of people have this as a destination. A lot of people, millions of people live here.
Tom, right now we do have limited service out of the city. We have both the Metro North and Long Island Railroad running out. We have the George Washington Bridge open. The tunnels are shut for security reasons. We're not having traffic other than emergency traffic come into the city. And I think at this point it would be extremely unlikely that we're going to have many people coming into the city tomorrow. We're going to be continuing to try to deal with the horrendous situation downtown.
Thank you very much, Governor. I know it's been a long and difficult day, and it will go on for you and for all New Yorkers for a long, long time, unfortunately.
Well, our prayers are with the families and the people whose lives are still at risk.
Thank you very much, Governor.
Thank you.
We want to go now, Matt, to Jim Miklashevsky, who is at the Pentagon. Jim, a lot of these flights were transcontinental flights, heavily loaded not only with passengers but with fuel.
That's right, Tom, and we just learned a few moments ago that the U.S. Navy is dispatching a couple of aircraft carriers from Norfolk, the JFK and the George Washington. One will be stationed off of New York. The other will be stationed in the Atlantic as close to Washington, D.C. as they can get. They'll be there to provide any possible military support that may be needed, including flying any kind of air cover should there be any additional warnings of any further terrorist attempted attacks. Now, as we stood here this morning, you can see the smoke is still billowing. The smoke just in the past few minutes has changed from black to white, a strong indication that they're throwing more water on the fire, as we saw from other vantage points. But the priority now is to get the fire under control. A casualty count is impossible at this point, Tom. As you've seen from the earlier pictures, the plane opened a huge wide gash in the side of the building. We're being told between the 4th and the 5th corridors. It smashed through the E and D rings, and people who were in that area tell me that debris and parts of the plane actually penetrated deep all the way into the B ring. There are 5 rings, A through E, and it entered in the E ring, so it plowed through a number of the rings. The priority now, as I said, is accounting for the casualties. Medevac helicopters have been flying in and out. You hear the ambulances. Occasionally, we've even seen F-16s flying low routes around the Pentagon and over Washington, D.C., flying those CAPs or air patrol missions that are usually flown in combat. But to see 2 aircraft carriers moved in locations off the United States to provide air cover, Tom, I mean, that's the kind of thing you normally see in a war zone.
Mick, can you tell me, was that chosen randomly where they hit the Pentagon? Can you tell us what the function of those people in that particular ring was, where it was hit?
Well, it's interesting because a number of people, and this really wasn't sarcastic, but they said, well, they hit on the wrong side, because just the opposite side of the building, of course, you have the offices of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. We were on that side of the building when the plane hit. We felt the building shake, the windows rattle, and looking outside immediately saw people on the run. There was pandemonium in the hallways. Now that section of the Pentagon, I thought at first when it was described to me that it may have hit in an area where some of the special operations offices are located. The Assistant Secretary for Special Operations is located near there, but the plane actually hit maybe about 60 to 70 feet to the right of that location. In that part of the building, there's it's very near a mall area, actually, where they have a shopping area for Pentagon employees. After all, there are 25 to 30,000 employees in there on any given day. And also in that part of the building, you had many Navy personnel, many reserve personnel. I bumped into many Army personnel who are adjacent to that. They think everybody's all right. The Navy people I talked to said they still had a few people that were unaccounted for. But again, it's going to be impossible to tell exactly what the casualty count is in there until they get that fire under control.
Matt.
All right, Jim Miklashevsky outside the Pentagon, thanks very much. Joining us now is General Norman Schwarzkopf, who was the commander of all forces in the Persian Gulf War. General Schwarzkopf, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Obviously, you've seen the footage, I'm sure, of the Pentagon and of southern Manhattan. We haven't seen much footage outside Pittsburgh. What are your thoughts this morning?
Well, you know, it's a very, very sad day for this country. It's really a sad day for the world as far as I'm concerned, and your heart goes out to all those families, and your prayers go out to all those people who lost their lives.
We are fighting a war now, it seems, a terrorist war here in this country. The question is, how do we go about fighting it, General?
Well, you know, that's one of those easy questions to ask and one of those very tough questions to answer. The deterrence against terrorists is almost impossible, because these are people who could care less about their own survival. And normally deterrence just says, you know, you hit me and we hit you back. harder. And in this case, these people don't care whether they lose their lives or not, and therefore it makes it doubly tough to deter. The fact is that the world is getting smaller, and you know, terrorism has come to our shores because we have the ability to span oceans and great distances in a very short time.
Yeah, General, have you been able to talk to anyone at the Pentagon and get some updates on who may have been injured or lost?
No, I mean, the information that I've heard is basically what you all have, and that's it. You know, they didn't hit the very critical parts, and therefore maybe we don't have as many casualties there. But when you look at what happened at the World Trade Center and the number of casualties that they probably have there, it's just horrendous.
General Schwarzkopf, hi, it's Katie. I'm just wondering, I mean, obviously you've been in the military for a long, long time. Have you ever heard, or is this a method of destruction that the U.S. military was aware of and had concerns about, where they would actually, hijackers would use a plane as a flying bomb?
Well, Katie, you know, Tom Clancy wrote a book about just that. Several years ago, he wrote a book about a Japanese pilot crashing his 747 directly into the Capitol building and wiping out the national government. And so it's not something that's new. Obviously, what's kind of shocking is we thought we had good protection against hijacking of aircraft, and what's very apparent today is that something needs to be done about that if this many aircraft can be hijacked
meaning
at the same time.
Meaning security at airports across the country, General?
Well, that and many other measures that could be taken, but I mean, it's kind of frightening when you consider the number of aircraft that were simultaneously hijacked and apparent with, I don't know, I can't say with apparent ease, I don't know, but it did in fact happen, and that's kind of frightening in itself.
Well, also, General Tom Brokaw here, the failure of intelligence here. I know it's always easy to say that at this point, but this is a very sophisticated and obviously widespread, complex operation that was planned. It was very tightly held in the most sophisticated way.
Yeah, Tom, but you and I both know that getting inside the intelligence, getting inside a terrorist group is probably the most difficult type of penetration that you can do. I mean, you've got to have somebody on the inside that can let you know what's going on, and that's not always the easiest thing to do in this type of terrorist organization.
All right, thank you very much, General Norman Schwarzkopf. We'll be back in touch with you throughout the day as we get more information. We'd love to get your oversight on all of this if we can.
Okay, Tom.
Well, let's go to Paul Bremer now, Ambassador Paul Bremer, who is the chairman of the National Commission on Terrorism. Mr. Ambassador, do we have any idea whatsoever who may be responsible for this?
Well, as you were just saying, we have a massive intelligence failure and a huge security failure that's going to have to be looked into. Analytically, there probably are 4 possible candidates. There's the Osama bin Laden al-Qaeda group that you've been talking about. There is the possibility of a Middle Eastern group such as Hezbollah or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad conducting an attack like this. And there are at least 2 states which at least are capable of such an attack, and that would be Iran and Iraq. So you have probably not more than 4 suspects.
How do we begin to find out who is responsible?
Well, the good news is that the hijacking 4 airplanes is a very complicated operation. Even hijacking 1 is complicated. And they will have left some trail behind them. They will have had to have checked in, and they will have had to have purchased tickets either under their name or alias names. They will have had to have showed pieces of identity. There will be a trail that will lead back from the hijackers at some point to the perpetrators. It may take some time, but we'll get there.
You're an expert on national security matters, Ambassador. How is this country going to have to change?
Well, I think it's one of those great challenges of fighting terrorism is to find the balance between being tempted to overreact, but also being absolutely certain, as the President said this morning, that people understand we're not going to take this sitting down. And I think once the perpetrators have been identified, and I believe they will be, the United States will have to retaliate with the full force of its military as hard as it possibly can. This is an act of war. It's an act of war that some have described as a domestic Pearl Harbor. In many ways, it's worse than Pearl Harbor. I think we will probably find the casualties are going to be higher than they were at Pearl Harbor. In Pearl Harbor, we knew immediately who had done it, and we therefore knew what the return address was. It was Japan. Here, we have higher casualties, less certainty as to where the attack came from, and therefore a more difficult response. But there must be a very strong military response to this act of war.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Paul Bremer, who is a longtime colleague of Henry Kissinger and a veteran of national security affairs in this country.